Nice to see you. Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just let me know when you're ready. Right? Okay. Good morning. The committee will come to order. I first of all want to apologize for us having a little late start here. We, of course, had the President of France addressing a joint session of Congress, and that's why we were running a little bit late. So for that, we apologize. Our nation is on the cusp of many major changes in its transportation system. We've seen the development of GPS, companies such as Uber and Lyft, and electric vehicles. These innovations are transforming the movement of people, goods, and services. But our current transportation infrastructure system is, simply put, stuck in a different generation. And unfortunately, our nation's small business owners often feel these effects the most. On average, the typical American commuter loses 42 hours of valuable productivity time each year to traffic. Some of us who travel around D.C. might agree that we lose more. Currently, an estimated 20% of federal roads provide poor ride quality, and 25% of bridges are fundamentally functionally obsolete, as well as fundamentally obsolete. I'm willing to bet that every member in this room can think of at least one urgent infrastructure project in their district and that they would like to see fixed today. While there are many that come to mind in my district, one that's very important to small businesses alike is the Brent Spence Bridge. This is a bridge that connects Ohio to Kentucky and carries an estimated 172,000 vehicles on Interstate 71 and 75 each day, more than double its intended capacity. To put this bridge's age in perspective, it was slated to be dedicated. It ultimately was delayed for a short period of time during the week of President John F. Kennedy's assassination. Because of that assassination, the dedication was delayed for a couple of days. Today it's labeled functionally obsolete by the U.S. Department of Transportation. As this committee has learned in past hearings, broadband deployment is also a crucial part of our nation's infrastructure, particularly for entrepreneurs in rural areas. As business owners continue to move to a more global marketplace, access to broadband is crucial to keeping small businesses competitive. Unfortunately, about 39% of the rural population, or 23 million people, still lack access to broadband internet service considered fast by the Federal Communications Commission. As with any major project, it is critical that small businesses are not left out of the conversation. Small businesses both create and rely upon our nation's infrastructure system. And as they create 2 out of 3 new jobs, they will likely be a driving force in repairing our broken system. I look forward to hearing from small business owners today and their ideas for moving our nation's infrastructure into the 21st century. And I would now like to yield to the acting ranking member, Ms. Adams, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all very much for being here. Infrastructure is a critical component to our economy and central to the nation's competitiveness. Port facilities help in the distribution of goods and people across the world. Utility systems provide the energy necessary to run factories, allowing for the production of goods. Telecommunications and broadband systems enable access to critical information and affordable communication. The nation's highways, bridges, and transit networks make possible the flow of goods and services. These systems form the economy's framework and are what makes the country competitive by allowing us to work more efficiently. Investment in infrastructure promotes future economic opportunities. In fact, 61% of the jobs directly created by infrastructure spending would be in the construction sector, 12% in the manufacturing sector, and 7% in retail trade. That's 80% in these 3 sectors alone. Most importantly, 90% of these jobs are good-paying middle-class jobs, many of which are supported by our nation's small businesses. Small companies dominate many of the sectors that maintain, strengthen, and upgrade our infrastructure and transportation networks. From construction to engineering to architecture, small businesses are critical to maintaining our infrastructure systems. Accordingly, a robust and well-planned investment in our infrastructure would benefit small businesses, both as users of these networks and by creating business opportunities for them. Unfortunately, the President's infrastructure plan unveiled earlier this year would fall woefully short of this goal. His plan slashes real federal investments and shifts the burden to cash-strapped states and local governments. It cuts more than $168 billion from existing transportation and infrastructure programs, and it allows large companies and foreign investors to toll our roads and bridges. This privatized approach would mean that many small companies will be paying Wall Street companies to access transportation arteries. Moreover, the Trump plan would largely circumvent environmental safeguards, gutting clean water, clean air protections under the excuse of speeding up projects. Although large Wall Street companies may benefit from this radical new infrastructure approach, there's nothing in the president's proposal that would guarantee small companies receive their fair share of federal contracts for the new infrastructure upgrades. I find it telling that in the 53-page document, the phrase small business does not even appear once. Absent an assurance that small farms will receive their fair share of this work, the small business sector should be very skeptical of this plan. All of us have an obligation to ensure that there's adequate federal infrastructure investment to stimulate the economy and to ensure our nation's long-term competitiveness. Doing so will ensure small businesses benefit, both as contractors and as those who use our infrastructure, while creating good jobs along the way. And it is my hope that today's discussion can help identify strategies for accomplishing that goal. On that note, I want to thank the witnesses for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Young lady yields back. And if members have opening statements prepared, I'd ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'll take just a moment before I introduce the panel this morning to explain our rules. We operate under the 5-minute rule. There's a lighting system to help you to stay within that. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. The yellow light will come on to let you know you got a minute to wrap up, and then the red light will come on, and that means stop. But if you go on a little bit, that'll be okay. But try to stay within those parameters if at all possible. And I'd now like to introduce our panel. Our first witness is Marcia Geldert Murphy, the Chief Operating Officer with W. James Taylor, Inc., located in Belleville, Illinois. She received both her master's and bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and her 25 years of professional experience spans the public and private sectors. Ms. Geldert Murphy is testifying today on behalf of the American Society of Civil Engineers, and we welcome you this morning. Our next witness will be Bill Schmitz, who is the Vice President for Sales and Quality Control at Gurnett Asphalt Company in Collins, New York. Gurnett Asphalt has 11 locations across western New York that produce and supply sand and gravel products. Mr. Schmitz testified before our committee in June of 2015 and will testify again today on behalf of the National Sandstone and Gravel Association. We welcome you back to the committee. Our third witness will be Kevin Beyer, General Manager of both the Federated Telephone Cooperative and Farmers Mutual Telephone Company in Chokio, Minnesota. These two cooperatives provide telecommunication services for over 2,700 square miles in rural Minnesota. Mr. Beyer will be testifying today on behalf of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, and we thank you for being here. And I would now like to ask Ms. Adams if she would like to introduce our fourth and final witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Bob D'Agostino, President and CEO of D'Agostino Electronic Services, Inc., or DES, founded in 1973. Mr. D'Agostino has more than 45 years of experience designing and installing innovative and comprehensive communication solutions and related infrastructure for voice, data, wireless security, and building automation. He holds the credential of a building industry consulting service, international registered communications distribution designer. He currently serves on the board of directors for the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the National Electrical Contractors Association. Mr. D'Agostino, welcome. Thank you for testifying today.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Geldert Murphy is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chabot and Acting Ranking Member, Ms. Adams, and members. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you here today. I am a licensed professional engineer and the Chief Operating Officer for W. James Taylor, Inc., a woman-owned small business. I have over 25 years of experience in civil engineering, design, and construction, 18 of those years with small businesses. I serve on the board of direction of the American Society of Civil Engineers, a professional engineering society with more than 150,000 members representing 50 states. Over half of ASCE's members work for private engineering firms, and a majority of engineering firms are small businesses. Every 4 years since 1998, ASCE has prepared a rating of the nation's infrastructure in our infrastructure report card. In the 2017 report card, our nation's cumulative grade was a D+. Poor grades reflect the underinvestment in our infrastructure. Our nation faces an infrastructure investment deficit of $2 trillion over the next 10 years. The investment gap has led to deficient roads and bridges, water main breaks, inadequate ports and inland waterways, late flights, and so much more. Failing to close this infrastructure investment gap brings serious economic uncertainty for small business. Businesses of all sizes are directly impacted through this lack of investment in our nation's infrastructure. As ASCE highlighted in its 2016 economic study, Failure to Act, failing to close this infrastructure investment gap brings significant economic consequences. If not addressed throughout the nation's infrastructure sectors, the economy is projected to lose almost $4 trillion in GDP, $7 trillion in lost business sales, and a loss of 2.5 million jobs in 2025. On top of those costs, each hardworking American family loses approximately $3,400 in disposable income each year from the underperforming infrastructure. Our nation is at a crossroads. Languishing infrastructure impedes our ability to compete in the global economy, which provides meaningful opportunity for small business. We need to increase our federal investment to address the national infrastructure deficit to achieve the economic conditions needed for the 21st century. To close the $2 trillion 10-year investment gap, we must increase investment from all levels of government and the private sector from 2.5% GDP to 3.5% GDP by 2025. We should begin with the following steps. 1, protect the competitive procurement of AE services. In 1972, the Brooks Act established the use of quality-based selection, QBS, which bolsters small business interests by providing services not solely based on cost, but on qualifications, increasing small businesses' competitive edge, allowing small firms to compete with large firms. 2, fix the Highway Trust Fund by adding 25 cents to the federal motor fuel tax. The current user fee should be raised and tied to inflation to restore its original purchasing power. This idea has been led by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and would provide a necessary infusion of $375 billion over 10 years and address the $1.1 trillion backlog of surplus transportation capital needs. This investment would undoubtedly benefit small business. 3, authorize programs to improve deficient infrastructure by fully funding them in an expedited, prioritized manner. 4, recognize that some elements of transportation policy, such as freight corridors and ports, require a more strategic focus from the federal government. And finally, small businesses will benefit from streamlining the project decision-making process. ASCE favors the idea of one agency, one decision to reduce the time to reach decisions on projects. We must take these steps to ensure all businesses, and especially small businesses, can thrive in the competitive global marketplace. When Congress is successful in crafting legislation to increase investment in infrastructure, it will not only benefit engineering firms, but any small business that relies on infrastructure for its livelihood. That concludes my formal statement. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady's time has expired. The next gentleman, Mr. Schmitz, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Adams, and the members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify on behalf of the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association. I am Bill Schmitz, Vice President of Dan Granat Gravel Products. NSSGA advances public policies that protect and expand the safe and environmentally responsible use of aggregates that build America's infrastructure and economy. Our industry directly employs over 100,000 people and supports an additional 450,000 jobs throughout the economy. Aggregates are used in all construction and public works projects. Since 1946, the Granat family and their companies have been proud to provide sand, gravel, stone, landscape aggregate, hot mix asphalt, and trucking to Western New York, Buffalo, and Northwestern Pennsylvania. Our locations are spread over 3 rural counties where people struggle to find good-paying jobs. We applaud the administration for focusing on increased infrastructure investment. However, we need the funding from the federal government to be more robust, routine, and reliable if we are to truly fix our nation's infrastructure woes. Infrastructure projects help create jobs and allow the movement of goods that are essential to the American way of life. Our system must be modernized to meet current demands, but it takes a long-term commitment. The Highway Trust Fund must be permanently fixed. NSSGA also supports the administration's focus on infrastructure improvements to rural areas where the investment is desperately needed. Rural areas lack a critical component of today's technology infrastructure. In our case, the absence of broadband has cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to work around this lack of connectivity. I work with state and local governments on infrastructure projects and permitting daily. These are important conversations for my company, but decisions made at the federal level impact us more deeply. When Congress delays the enactment of a highway bill or puts off fixing the Highway Trust Fund yet again, the impact on small business is greater, especially in our industry. Since we provide the material and we use the system, we need consistent and steady direction from our federal partners. At Granat, we think of infrastructure in 4 ways. First, the means to get our material to our customers. Second, the way we communicate with our facility suppliers and customers. Third, the materials that we provide that are used in infrastructure projects. And lastly, the projects themselves. We believe that streamlining the permitting for a road so that it can be built in 2 years instead of 10 is a great stride forward. However, if the material needed to build it takes 5 or 10 years to permit due to over-regulation, then the cost of the project is doubled or tripled, and we are failing to fix the root of the problem. Like 70% of the NSSGA members that are small businesses, at Granat, we do not have the resources that larger companies use to comply with confusing, overlapping, and unnecessary regulations. In 2006, the Corps of Engineers shut down our South Dayton plant, suddenly designated part of our water treatment system as wetlands, even though these same conditions had not changed for 40 years. This decision reversed our decades-long dialogue with the agency on this operation. Even though we disagreed, we worked with the Corps to fix this alleged disturbance. Unfortunately, the Corps had no clear idea of what appropriate mitigation might be and forced us to constantly change course in order to stay in business. This lack of clarity was devastating and took hundreds of thousands of dollars and 12 years to resolve. 12 years that could have been spent with other projects and supporting our workers and local community. I would encourage this committee to look at ways of reforming our regulatory system so Granat does not have to experience another unnecessary 12-year quest for answers. As my personal experience shows, small businesses in all sectors depend on clear and certain federal rules and regulations as well as robust investment in infrastructure. Granat supplied material to the Ohio Street Harbor Connector project in Buffalo, which cleaned up environmental problems, created waterside parkland and recreational ship canal access, built a beautiful parkway. This project spurred millions in residential and commercial development. When regulators and small businesses work together, great things can and do happen. Throughout America, thousands of small businesses like ours partner with the government to improve the communities we live and work in. In addition to streamlining regulations, we must have predictable and steady infrastructure funding that small businesses can depend on. Thank you for my opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much. It's good to have you back. Mr. Byer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Acting Ranking Member Adams, thank you for the honor to testify before the committee today. My name is Kevin Byer, and I am the General Manager of Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, which provide broadband, voice, and cable TV service in rural Minnesota. I'm also a board member of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, which represents about 850 small rural telecom providers in 46 states. There appears to be widespread consensus that high-speed broadband is now essential infrastructure and necessary to modern life in America. The public policy questions that remain are how to best ensure that the service is available, affordable, sufficient, and sustainable in high-cost rural areas that don't attract private investment on their own without an underlying support mechanism. It's important in the first instance to understand that investment in many rural areas does not offer a practical business case for broadband deployment. What rural consumers can realistically afford to pay would not even cover the costs of operating the network, much less the enormous capital expenditures necessary to deploy broadband over vast and often rugged terrain. Additional resources are needed in such situations to help make the business case for broadband investment and ongoing operations. In addition, consideration should be given to existing programs that would help to ensure such resources are directed to the right places to promote and sustain such investment. For example, the Federal High Cost Universal Service Fund, or USF, provides direct support to keep broadband rates affordable for small businesses and residential consumers. This support provides the business case needed to justify spending or borrowing the upfront capital needed to deploy scalable, advanced broadband networks. It is important to note that the high-cost USF program has undergone extensive reforms in recent years to reorient the USF program towards broadband, ensure funding is targeted to where it is needed, and define what the FCC considers an efficient level of support in each area. In addition, high-cost support recipients must meet specified deployment obligations and geocode every new location to which they deploy broadband utilizing USF support. Leveraging the existing USF program in many infrastructure initiatives would allow for quick and effective implementation and help avoid costly and time-consuming exercise of building a program from scratch. The USDA Rural Utility Service has long been an important source of financing for many rural providers as they seek to deploy advanced broadband networks. Congress directed RUS to create a new $600 million rural broadband loan and grant pilot program in its recent omnibus spending bill and included language to direct the funding to areas with the worst service. While this is a good start, even more resources will be needed to spur broadband deployment, and we would encourage Congress in future infrastructure initiatives to include the same protections and also explicitly ensure that these efforts complement ongoing USF and RUS programs, rather than competing with one another in a way that undermines the cause of rural broadband and the effective use of those resources. Other key principles that should be considered as well. Regardless of what mechanism is used to provide support, funding recipients should have proven track records and demonstrate the ability to deploy and sustain high-speed broadband networks. Small businesses and others depend on reliable service providers to locate and stay in rural America. As consumers demand more from their broadband connections, networks should be reliably upgradable to even higher speeds. Precious resources will be wasted if we aim only for the capabilities needed today and miss out on the network investments that should last for decades. While the business case for broadband is the essential first step, it is also important to address barriers to deployments of networks. Congress should streamline permitting processes to ensure small businesses with limited staff don't expend scarce resources to suffer from significant delays to secure costly and potentially duplicative approvals for network construction. We recognize that gathering more granular data on broadband availability is important, but please take care to ensure that such data is not collected in different ways by multiple agencies. We should aim for only one set of reports to one agency with consistent granular data that can be used to help guide policy. Again, it's my pleasure to be here today, and I look forward to your questions and working with you on these issues.
Thank you very much. Mr. D'Agostino, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chapman. Ranking Member Adams, members of the committee for inviting me to testify today. On behalf of the National Electrical Contractors Association, NECA, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to submit a statement for the record. The committee is to be commended for holding this important hearing. My name is Bob D'Agostino, and I'm owner of D'Agostino Electronic Services. We are a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania-based company founded in 1973 with over 100 employees that design, install, maintain technology solutions for voice, data, video, security, and control systems. We at D'Agostino Electronics are proud members of the National Electrical Contractors Association, where I have the honor to serve on the board of directors for the Western Pennsylvania chapter since 2015. NECA's 4,000 contractors play a crucial role in the construction and maintenance of our nation's power, infrastructure, building, data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. All with safety is our #1 priority. When natural disasters occur, our linemen work long hours and inclement weather conditions to restore power to our homes and businesses. We have a track record of installing and maintaining complex electrical and communication systems in places like airports, rail systems, and we're working every day to build the next generation of reliable power and communication networks and infrastructure that will advance this nation into the next digital revolution. We at NECA are committed to empowering lives and communities across this great nation. After decades of underfunding our nation's infrastructure, we're beginning to see the signs of reinvigorating growth. While the recent proposal from the White House was encouraging, NECA holds concerns over the lack of direct federal funding. More direct federal spending is critical to ensure the safety, security, and efficiency of our transportation, power, and communication networks. As this committee searches to understand the relationship between infrastructure development and small business, they should keep in mind that work done well the first time by qualified contractors and highly skilled tradespeople is the very best return on investment that can be made. Therefore, Congress should continue the application of the prevailing wage laws on federal infrastructure projects. The next topic I hope to address is a paramount issue for thousands of small businesses we represent, and that is a prompt payment. Even with deadlines imposed by prompt payment laws, small business contractors continue to tell horror stories of not receiving payment for months beyond their due date, if not years on end. Small businesses knowingly assume risk by agreeing to complete work, but they do so under the assumption they will be paid within a reasonable period of time. To begin the process of fixing these issues, we at NECA encourage members of the committee to continue their support for Representatives Fitzpatrick, Knight, and Murphy bill, the Small Business Payment for Performance Act. Legislation such as this is needed to address the burden placed on small businesses by improper pay practices of the construction industry. The next matter concerning my company and many others around the country is that no matter how much infrastructure work comes down the pike, there is no way to complete it without an adequate workforce. That said, this committee is well aware of workforce shortage we face in the trades. Our nation is to address its infrastructure needs. It must first address this problem. In response to the challenge, NECA has turned to its 70-year-old partnership with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers that has produced the best electricians, linemen, and communication craftspeople in our nation's history. Our joint apprenticeship program with the IBEW receives no federal money and educates students through as many as 10,000 hours of on-the-job and classroom education. NECA believes that through these three simple objectives, we can responsibly address the skilled labor shortage. And they are to further encourage our young people to recognize that opportunities that a job in the construction and maintenance trades presents. Secondly, to financially incentivize young people who choose this route and the employers who hire these new workers. And third, to remove any regulatory roadblocks for potential entry into the trades. With all that said, as a small business contractor, I'm extremely encouraged by this committee's efforts to understand the role that small businesses play with infrastructure projects. The overarching themes of funding, contract reform, and workforce shortages can be found nationwide. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and we are optimistic that this committee remains committed to addressing the challenges that face our nation's small businesses and the need for the infrastructure investment so that this country can compete in a global economy.
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
I'll now recognize myself to begin the questioning for 5 minutes, and I'll begin with you, Ms. Geldert Murphy. In your testimony, you mentioned the one agency, one decision policy for federal permitting. Could you explain the impact that that would have on small businesses and the American economy?
Absolutely. One decision, one agency will reduce the time of delays on projects. And small businesses in particular can't absorb the risk that goes along with long delays on projects. Large firms can absorb, they have the ability to absorb the risks and delays. And so it's very, very important for small businesses that we get a decision. We come to an answer. The answer may be that the project can't be constructed, that it's not appropriate, and that's fine. Let's come to the answer so that we can move on and use our resources on projects that are good for our economy and good for our businesses. And small businesses can't tolerate some of those delays in the way that large businesses can.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Smith, I'll turn to you. Could you talk about the importance of strong infrastructure in the rural areas and small towns? It seems like, you know, we talk about it a lot in terms of our cities, but I think sometimes the more rural areas get kind of short shrift. And if you could talk about that, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Oh, I thank you very much. It's a great question. Our infrastructure, we're rural farm-to-market communities that we live and work in, and we've got farms, we've got other businesses. When the infrastructure's bad and there's a detour on a road, it's not oftentimes there's another state highway available for 10 to 15 miles. Detours are a killer to many small businesses. Bridges are restricted, road weights are restricted. It costs the businesses money, and in today's competitive marketplace, those costs are borne by the small businesses. Employees cannot get to work. Projects take much longer than they should when a bridge is identified or a failing road is identified. Oftentimes, the length of time it takes to get permits to reconstruct it is a huge burden. It's several years, 2 to 3, 5 years at times to reconstruct a bridge that had an unknown structural defect.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Byer, I'll turn to you now. This committee held a hearing earlier this month on the disappearing business case for investing in rural broadband markets. What can Congress do to incentivize carriers, large and small, to invest in deploying broadband services to rural communities?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. The RUS program that they provided funding for will certainly help in that case, but we need coordination and funding through both the USF program and the RUS program, and make sure that they're not competing with each other to serve the same areas. Once the broadband is built and has provided the services required by the program, we should make sure that those scarce resources are not building duplicate networks over the top. So coordination is one of the big concerns we would have, and then of course the USF fund has been underfunded and has continuing underfunding needs. So we would hope that additional funds could be supplied to the USF program.
Okay, thank you very much. And I've got about a minute left, Mr. D'Agostino, so I'm going to conclude with you. What would you say is the #1 challenge that small businesses experience due to lack of certainty from the federal government when it comes to infrastructure, or any of the groups that you mentioned? What do you think is one of the most significant challenges with respect to infrastructure?
Well, the one reality is that many of the software programs that we as contractors use today are becoming to be cloud-based solutions, which the connectivity of broadband is critical so that our on-site people can have collaboration on the project and efficiency, accuracies of performing the work. And we as small businesses are able to actually compete against larger companies because of the fact that the software that is cloud-based today gives us the same kind of competitive advantage that they would of having such a large software program. There is just one.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. My time has expired. The acting ranking member, Ms. Adams, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, what types of federal highway projects will be or currently are impacted by the Highway Trust Fund, and how can we improve upon this resource?
The issue we have with the instability of the Highway Trust Fund is the state's abilities to properly plan long-term transportation projects and transportation plans. Without a steady source of funding, the planning and the actual completion of projects is often impacted by delayed funding, and especially in the Northeast where we operate, we're a seasonal business. You all hear Buffalo, there's 2 seasons, construction and winter, and this year the construction season is going to be very short. So we have to be ready to go when summer comes, and it's not a 12-month program, it's 6 months, and we need to know. We need that certainty, and stable federal funding translates to state programs at work, which translates to local programs at work. So it's a trickle-down effect.
Okay. Is private financing for construction projects linked to the availability of resources in the trust fund?
We have tried in New York to do some private financing, but that's difficult with the uncertainty of the federal funding and matching funds. Again, the certainty of the program is paramount. A fixed highway trust fund equals steady funding, and people can plan 5 and 10 years out. And businesses are willing to invest when they have the certainty of what's going to happen in a few years.
Right. Mr. D'Agostino, rural areas can be hit hard by economic instability given their isolation and in some communities limited diversity of industries. What investments would be most useful to spur growth in these regions?
Well, coming from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, one of the industries that we had in there for many years was the steel industry. And what brought the steel industry to Pittsburgh was the natural resources of infrastructure of rivers and railroad. Today's digital era that we begin to live in today requires connectivity, be it broadband, internet. So no matter how, the rural area needs to be served because it's no longer location, location, location. It's connectivity, connectivity, connectivity. Without that connectivity, the small business doesn't have a chance. The farmers, agriculture, every facet is affected by the lack of that infrastructure in place. And I'm speaking strictly on the technology component of that.
Okay. What federal efforts do you suggest to target infrastructure to these areas in order to facilitate growth and attract small businesses to locate and remain in rural communities?
I would say that there are a few things. One is, of course, the funding necessary to get some of these projects off the ground, to give certainty to the application, even if they go into a private partnership type of environment. And and to understand that the projects should have more of a master plan, if you will. Infrastructure consists of a combination of highways, high voltage tires, wireless connectivity, fiber optics, smart cities. I think if we sit back more and create more of a master plan, that we can leverage the monies that are spent across all of these infrastructure efforts.
Okay. Construction and manufacturing, which are both dominated by small businesses, are sensitive to the business cycle. How can infrastructure help firms mitigate the effect of these instabilities and anyone may take that question. Got about 45 seconds.
I'd be happy to answer that
Yes, ma'am.
question. Thank you. You know, I think the important thing is that it goes back to what we've all been saying, is that there needs to be consistency, stability, reliability. We need to know that there is a strong federal leadership in the infrastructure. And so as long as there's strong federal leadership in the infrastructure, the states, the locals, the businesses, private enterprise can follow along and do what they're designed to do. But we need strong federal leadership to progress our infrastructure and have a strong economy, increase the GDP, increase income, increase jobs.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony. I'm sitting here listening to each piece of this testimony, and first, as background, I started a construction company in 1975. And so I've got something in common with everybody here along the way. The engineering component that you've testified to, Ms. Geldert, and the sand and gravel and the surfacing, we've done a lot of the support work for that and worked around that a lot. And then with the broadband piece, I was the first customer of DSL service on 2 different telephone networks when they connected, and they said, well, the reason we haven't really deployed this yet is because we don't know how to price it. And I said, wire it up to my place, because I'm the guy that doesn't care how much it costs. I got to have it. And you know, then with the electrical side of this thing too. So here's my reflection as I'm listening. Last Sunday after church, I went over to look at my son's new shop for a construction company, and I'd watched it come together here over the last few months, and it's almost close to done. It's out in the country, a couple miles from the nearest town and a mile from their house. Works out really great. But what I'm seeing in there, first, no, I have to reflect a little bit. I built a shop in the country in 1979. I ended up moving the office to town because we needed to be closer to the post office when we put a bid in, and to get that in by postmark time. And we drove to engineering firms to pick up a set of plans and leave a $50 or $100 deposit for that roll of plans. That's how it was then. And you know, today we download the plans off high-speed internet, and we bid electronically. And that shop is set up now to where he can control the locks on it from anywhere in the world, and he can watch the monitoring cameras on what's going on inside and outside from anywhere in the world where there's high-speed service, which is what you were thinking, Mr. Byer. You have to have the service on the other end, too. But it's fantastic the change that has taken place. So he has rural water there. He has all the electrical he needs that was built by the co-op back in the day. And then the fiber optics coming in, and I said, what kind of speed do you have? And he said, it's fiber optic. Anything I want to pay for, I can have here. So all of those utilities that you see in the center of the city is out in rural Iowa, and there's nothing that can slow him down that I can see in being competitive in except the logistics in any place in the world. So I'm thrilled by the progress we've made, but I'm also very well aware that progress hasn't been made everywhere. This is an exception as far as I view it. So as I listened to the testimony, I had a couple of things came to mind. One is I want to let you know how much I support high-speed services everywhere. We're controlling tractors with them and managing farms with them, and it goes on and on. And the imagination that we had 10 years ago doesn't begin to look into what we're actually doing today. But a couple of things that came up that I was concerned about that I wanted to ask on is this, that I would think everybody here as witnesses are interested in getting the most out of the dollars we have to build the maximum amount of infrastructure. And so when the Highway Trust Fund came up, I started to think about when I came into this town, I had the formula, and I'm not sure it's exactly the same day, but it's close. They announced that 28% of that trust fund was being used to satisfy environmental and archaeological requirements. And I say about 20% went to Davis-Bacon. That's the standard number that I've used for a long time, Davis-Bacon wage scales. 3% went to trails, 17% went to mass transit. That left about 32% for roads and bridges, which is my shorthand version for trust fund dollars. Is that a concern to any of you about actually building more roads and bridges out of the trust fund dollar and getting more out of the dollars we have? Or is the ask, let's add more to the pie rather than redirect the spending within it? I'd start with you, Ms. Geldert Murphy.
Thank you, and I appreciate that question. You know, it's a twofold answer. Number one, we're dealing with dollars on the Federal Highway Trust Fund that started in 1993 and haven't been increased or indexed since then. So they don't have the buying power even in the percentages that we were looking at before. However, we do believe that we need to protect the health, safety, and welfare of, that's in our ethics canon for civil engineers, to protect the health, safety, and welfare. We believe strongly in that. However, we do believe, as we said, with the one agency, one decision suggestion, that would help expedite matters and take time towards working towards projects and funding working towards projects.
I'm going to run out of time here, so please.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Schmitz, and if the chair would allow me to just allow the witnesses to answer.
If you could keep your answers relatively brief, but we'll go right down.
Okay, thank you. I would concur with what was just said, but if we can build projects quicker, streamline coordination between agencies, federal and state, these projects that need to be addressed could be built more timely and efficiently, and the key is a standard plan, a long-term plan to do this so that we can move forward.
So in our case, the USF funds is the underpinning for us to be able to get loans and be able to keep a network in place and operate that network at a rate that a consumer can afford. And yes, it would be very good for agencies to have a single reporting system that we could use, and instead of reporting to every agency separately, report to one separate form that would be shared across agencies. But we do need additional funds in USF. The FCC has recognized that, and so has Congress.
Mr. D'Agostino?
In reference to the application of any infrastructure in that nature, I would say that that creates a pathway for us, a pathway to either lay fiber optics, a pathway perhaps to connect the electric grid. So again, getting back to my earlier point of looking at this on a master plan schedule would be the very most beneficial that the government can do, is to try to do it in that fashion, keeping in mind that we want to get the work performed by the most qualified individuals so that we get the longest life cycle out of something. It's not just the initial investment of cash, but let's look at it more of a life cycle than just the initial cost.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yield back,
Gentleman's
Mr. Chairman.
time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economics, Growth, Tax, Capital Excise. Is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. D'Agostino, the governor of Pennsylvania announced investments of $60 million for 12 drinking water, wastewater, non-point source projects across 12 counties through Penvest. Can you put that in context a little bit when you talk about connectivity versus location as a model of what you're referring to in terms of this conversation?
In reference to wastewater?
Well, just in reference to the wastewater is one example, but the fact that here is a state, making investment in infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just speak to, because you use the word connectivity.
Connectivity,
Yes,
right.
right.
And I think, well, in that case, Sarah, that what we're looking at also is maybe not so much a centralized location, but more of a distributive type of topology, if you will,
Right.
of these types of infrastructures, so that they can lend themselves to be either primary or secondary path connectivity support of needs that we have today.
Right. And the reason I probably asked you that is it's the first time I've heard that term you use in terms of connectivity versus usually most people say location. And what I'm hearing you say is it's sort of like a new world we're operating in.
Most definitely. We are in a digital era.
Right.
The Internet of Things, the industrial Internet of Things, the blockchain environment. There's so many new things that are coming into that we need to prepare ahead of time to address them and to leverage these new technologies to do one thing, and that is to make our lives that much better.
Can anyone, you sort of direction I was going in the questioning about the aspect of connectivity as the gentleman has just expressed about local government, state government, local government, and better use of the dollars. Can you speak a little bit to that?
I can speak a little bit. So, in our case, in Minnesota, we have a border-to-border program that helps fund broadband build-outs. And that program works in conjunction with federal programs, such as the USF program or our US lending programs, that allow us to build fiber optics to provide that connectivity that they're talking about. But the topography, as he speaks of, is more of a distributed network, and we do need to get fiber connectivity for the bandwidth that continues to grow that our small businesses need to operate.
That's a very good question. In our case, where we do business is where the natural resources are deposited. So the most logical areas are where the natural resources are good, which are often rural areas. And for us to competitively compete in business and to do business, we need the connectivity of broadband. And currently, as I said in my testimony, that we had to invest in a private microwave network just so we were able to do business in today's world. So it's very important for this to be available not only to us, but to our customers, our suppliers, our employees, so that we can communicate in today's world.
Thank you. With regard to state and local agencies, particularly from our perspective, we've seen a lot of them step up over the last 4 years. 26 states have added a gas tax, but they need a strong federal partner. And that's what we've had in a long time, and that's the way the system has been set up, to have that strong federal partner. You know, as the Constitution has in the Commerce Clause, that it's to look at the farm to port costs. That helps the rural areas, but understanding we need to have strong urban areas as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Shabbat. Thank you to our panelists for being here today. As Congressman King is from Western Iowa. I'm from Northeastern Iowa. As I tour my district of 20 counties, the #1 economic issue in my district is lack of workers, workforce development. Highway and heavy contractors in particular cannot find people to go out and do the work. And these are good paying jobs with good benefits that can't be exported to China or to Mexico. One of the reasons I love infrastructure. So I'd like to hear from each of you, if you would, on what can we do, what can your industry do, what can we do at the federal government level to ensure a more reliable stream of workers. I've talked to Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, I've talked to Speaker Paul Ryan, I've talked to the administration, and I've said, you know, the Tax Cut and Job Act bill is a good thing for business and our economy, get us growing at maybe 3% GDP a year, but I think we can grow at 4%. But we need a couple things to happen. One is we need welfare reform. You know, if you're physically and mentally able to work, you should be working. To put it simply, it's not a simple issue, but that would summarize my thoughts on it. And secondly, we need tons in Iowa of legal immigration to help supply the workforce. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what your industries are doing and what role can the federal government, could we be playing or should we be playing in finding you all workers?
I would love to tackle that one. Thank you very much.
We'd love to have the answers.
I think that it goes back to what all of us on this panel have been saying is consistency, 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 reliability. So the business cycle is strong. If there is strong funding and consistent funding in place, then we know that the work is available. So the workforce that's out there is not attracted to a business where you don't know as the ups and downs will come and go for the business cycle. So that's number one. Number two, we do need to have strong apprenticeship programs. We do with our company as well, and that helps us. We've got a lot of young people who come in to the apprenticeship program for our company, and they're grateful to see that they can earn a good wage. But once again, we have to have consistent funding to keep the business strong, the business cycle strong.
Mr. Schmitz?
I believe we really need to focus on education, and one thing that our company has done is started doing outreach to children in elementary school and explaining to them about our industry, the construction industry, and the fact that our great paying jobs and careers and working with your hands and with machinery and building America is a good, great way to make a living, and they should not feel ashamed that they're not getting a four-year degree. There's great tradespeople. You can make a great living as an electrician, as a plumber. These are good ways to do that. Being a bricklayer, a truck driver, these are jobs that, you know, build America, and they should be proud of it. And I think it really starts as young with education in the schools.
Is there anything the federal government should be doing? I don't typically ask that type of question.
Well, I'm not sure exactly.
Because we do way too many things.
Right, and that's the key, but that's something that I personally pushed. I was president of my local school board, and we pushed vocations. There's a lot, being rural areas, we need people. As you said, the farmers need people. I grew up on a farm. There's not enough people in the rural areas to work, and it's even worse in the city. One of the things that could help is the federal government's push for quotas for minority and women's business. Sometimes those quotas misalign availability of people to work on the jobs, especially in rural areas. Certainly urban areas, it's a great program, but we're so far removed from the city that sometimes it creates an issue with quotas.
Thank you, Mr. Byer.
Thank you for the question. We find that healthy communities are the biggest issue for us because we do have people that are interested in our industry, our technology. It's exciting to some extent as the broadband world grows. But what we often lack is the additional job for that spouse to come out to our area. And what needs to happen is we need telehealth, telework in order for that spouse to have employment. And that takes those broadband networks for them to be able to work from home and be connected to society and their families when they move that way. And all of that underpinned for us, as we look at it, is that USF program needs to be sufficiently funded in order for those networks to continue to be there, to be sustainable and affordable to the consumers.
It's a good point. And I hope I don't mispronounce your name, Mr. D'Agostino. Yes.
Not a problem. A few things that we're trying to do, and that is in our office, we're bringing the children to our office to see what work's all about. It's just good to get them involved as early on. Helmets to hard hats is another thing that we encourage to do. And any of the acts that are presently in play right now, for example, the 529 Savings Act, to be able to leverage that towards ancillary costs that apprentice may get going through their process. And that is some tax incentive for us as employers to hire apprentice. That over the years, it's gone from the counselors in school directing all the students to head towards college. And we did not really get a very good cut of the people that are going through high school to move into the trades. So I'd encourage if somehow we could get plugged into those counselors a lot better to give the students options.
Great. Thank you very much. My time's expired. It's a real issue, though. So thank you for your insight into that. I yield back the time I don't have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired. We want to, after consultation with the acting ranking member, we decided that since we started late and in the interest of everybody's respecting their time, we won't go into a second round here. I think the answers that we were given were very comprehensive and very helpful. And we're talking about a very important issue, infrastructure, and the importance of it to the American economy, and especially the importance of including small business in this effort. So we want to thank you all for helping us to have more insight than we did before we started this meeting. And I would also ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.